Yes.
Thank you.
Loud and clear. All right. So I'll call the meeting to order. I think we have all of our technical difficulties worked out. And the first agenda item is staff longevity pins.
I am happy to give Michael Fashaway his 15-year staff longevity pin today. Michael's actually one of the first people I met when I moved to Helena 13 years ago. Back then, we were working on what we call critical infrastructure. Since that time, that's evolved into structures and addresses theme. Michael has become the state GIS addressing expert and has been a major factor in, I can't remember what you're the chair of the initiative, Next Gen 911, co-chair of the Next Gen National Next Gen 911 GIS subcommittee. Has done enormous amounts of great work here. About 5 years ago, moved into the role of land information lead, which continues to do great work in that area, as well as juggling the needs of our other land information layers like mapping control, boundaries, oversees all that. So it's no surprise with all the good work that he's done that we have such a big turnout to celebrate this accomplishment. Thank you, everyone.
I would like to add, if I may, that when Michael, spotted a foolish commissioner who had stuck his rear-wheel drive van in a snowdrift, he and two little old ladies, no offense intended, but that was a fair description, pushed the van out and kept me able to attend this meeting. So, thank you for that. I think that's the kind of generous spirit that we expect.
This morning?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael.
And before we get to introductions, I believe we have one more staff longevity pin.
So I am pleased to present Gemma with her 5-year pin. Gemma Hazen has worked for the shared catalog a couple times, and she is such an incredible asset to the program. She, Gemma and I together, and with Mike, who is now departed from the State Library, moved the server from our local machine to transition to a software as a service on that, and that was a huge part of our lives for like a year. And she has also been led the acquisitions pilot project over the last couple of years, helped us with our Unicode conversion when we converted the server, and her passion and dedication to the shared catalog has been integral, I think, towards our steady progress towards standardization and sustainability within our program.
Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you. We have a lot of people here, and if you haven't signed in, I hope that you will take a moment to sign in so that we can record your attendance. But I also would like to take some time right now, and I think it'll take a little bit of time to make introductions. I'll go first. My name is Ann Kish. I'm from Twin Bridges, Montana, and the chair of the State Library Commission.
Jamie Doggett from White Sulphur Springs.
Ken Wall from Missoula.
Kenny Garlich from Bozeman.
Darla Fromboys from Browning.
Marla Stark from right here. Elsie Arntzen, the state superintendent.
Bruce Smith from Helena.
Jenny Stapp, the state librarian.
Evan Hammer of State Library.
And I'm Melissa Williams with the State Library. McCall Flynn, Governor's Education Policy Advisor. Amy Martwick, State Library. Jennifer Burdell, State Library.
Bryce Maxwell, Program Coordinator from Montana National Heritage Program.
Karen Coleman, Biological Systems Coordinator with the Montana Natural Heritage Program.
Wow. Dan Dawkins, Senior Zoologist, Natural Heritage Program.
Kate Jack, Ecologist and Project Manager at the Natural Heritage Program. Tracy Cook, Carol Urban, State Library. Jenna Hazen, State Library.
Hi, I'm Nanette Gilbertson. I'm the lobbyist for the Montana Library Association.
Darlene House from Montana National Heritage Program.
Viv Hamill, Chief Legal Counsel for the Montana University System.
Scott Lindbergh, Vice President for Research at the University of Montana.
And Braden Burkholder, I'm a biological data analyst for the Natural Heritage Program.
Can we hear from introductions from the folks who are attending online right now? You can go in order that you're listed if you'd like.
Mary Helen Farrar from the University of Montana.
Jim Kammer from Montana State Library.
Kylie McGregor, Montana State Library.
Rebecca Camp, Montana State Library.
Linda Vance, Senior Ecologist, Montana Natural Heritage Program.
Is that all we have? Can you let us know, Marlis, as other people come in and we can get their introductions and also mark them present for the meeting? Thank you. So, our first action item is something that is a little bit new. We've moved to a consent agenda. It's something that we're going to try out. And month by month, I think we will have different things on the consent agenda, things that we normally pass. But for this month, we only have approval of the minutes on the consent agenda item.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes to approve the minutes of the October 4th, 2019 commission meeting. And then you'll see that there are some finalized meeting minutes from August. We have already approved those. Those are just there for reference so that people can look back and see the work that has been done over the last couple of meetings. Let's see. Next on the agenda, we have the Governor's Office Education Policy Priorities. McCall Flynn.
Thanks for letting me join you guys this morning. Just a couple updates for the things. I know I didn't join you guys in the fall, but I was with you this summer. So a couple quick updates. First, talk a little bit about broadband. The governor, for his back-to-school tour, visited West Valley School up in Kalispell and talked a lot about broadband for our schools. And he then announced in October that 100% of our K-12 schools are now connected or have access to high-speed internet, which is very exciting. And a report released by our partners at Education Superhighway really highlights the status of this broadband activity and found that 100% of school districts in Montana can now access the internet speeds of 100 kilobits per second per student. That's up from 98% a year ago and 78% in 2015. And although that's really great, we know we still have lots of work to do. The FCC has a long-term goal of 1 megabits per second per student. And right now in Montana, we're only at about 64% of our schools that have upgraded to that scalable infrastructure. And with Education Superhighway, we're working with about 62 other schools to get them upgraded or at least some access to this kind of broadband. And so since the beginning of our partnership with Education Superhighway in 2015, we've seen that fiber access has expanded. Demand has grown. It's increased by nearly 5 times. And the cost is decreasing, which I think is really important for our schools. It's decreased by 76%, which is, $10 before megabits per second. Now it's $2.40, which is a really great decrease for our schools. And then second, wanted to touch a little bit on the census. I know Jenny has been working a lot with our census partners, but wanted to give you all a quick update on some of the work that I'm doing and then in partnership with the libraries. And as you all probably know, Department of Commerce is running the census, leading the 2020 census for Montana. Lieutenant Governor Cooney is the chair of the Complete Count Committee. And we've asked our education partners to be involved. And these are partners, from anyone that sits in a school, to those that travel the state, to those that work, maybe in a legislative role or advocacy role. We're really asking that they spread the message of the importance of federal funding funding. And I actually have a handout here that shows some of the costs attached to, thanks Marlis, to funding for our K-12 schools, and really how important an accurate count is for this kind of funding. And we know that libraries are going to be really involved in this work as well. Like I said, I've talked to Jenny a couple times on some of the outreach that they're doing. And, you know, we've talked, you know, that libraries are going to be heavily involved in providing space for census takers, you know, giving information to the public, building partnerships at that local level, and really just being catalysts for those communities to bring people together. And lastly, I did talk to Jenny, and I know the last time I joined you all, you had some problems with your back steps. Just kidding, I really don't do that. But I said that he was going to give me credit, even though I really didn't even say a word about it. But maybe it's just all the positive energy.
That's right.
So congrats on this back steps. That's all I had. I'm happy to take questions if folks have them.
Just
Yeah.
to clarify something, in the first part of your report, you said that students have access to 100 kilobits per second.
So that would be the it's per student. So it's internet speeds of 100 kilobits per second.
That's like 1 megabits per second.
Right. It's pretty small, but it's access, which is some didn't have at all. And you know, we always know we have work to do, but it's a good starting point.
So if that was 100 students in the school district, that would be 100 kilobits bandwidth at that site. Do I understand it correctly?
Some schools meet that, but not all do. Like I said, 64% of our schools actually meet that goal. And there's about 62 schools right now that don't.
Would it be 100 times 100 if it's 100 kilobits per student and there's 100 students?
That's correct.
100.
I mean, it strikes me that that's actually kind of a cool way to think about it. I mean, it's impossible to know. I suppose you need a certain amount of bandwidth regardless of whether you have one student or 10,000 students, because you just need a certain amount of bandwidth to do things like GIS or really watch really great movies. So I think that is an interesting measure. And as we think about broadband, I think that we should at least have that as part of our planning, sort of a measure. And
one of the goals that we've talked about striving for is 5 megabits per connecting point to the internet in a library. So that would be every staff workstation, every public access workstation, as well as the average of every Wi-Fi connection in a library at any given time.
And are these sort of coordinated slightly between the kind of the governor's major with the broadband initiative and the way we look at this?
Not necessarily. No, those numbers that I stated really come from the American Library Association. They're actually a little bit old at this point. And then the FCC adopted their own E-rate. They're not standards. They refer to them as guidelines for libraries that are also different.
I wonder what the experience of a library in Big Timber or fill in the blank is now in terms of when things start to slow down, what they feel the requirements at the high school, for instance.
So we, as you know, completed the Gigabit Toolkit for all of the libraries, and we're working with Simmons College in Boston to provide that analysis. And I think we're still on track to have that available to you at your February commission meeting.
Interesting.
Jimmy, I haven't plugged in as much to the broadband as I did a couple years ago, but through Shelby and others, I know there's a lot of movement now to the low-level satellite-based internet that Elon Musk and others are putting up and cluttering up our skies with. But has there been discussion at the national level on the impact of that in the next, say, 5 years, or when that starts to, certainly the competition with CEMA would drive prices down a bit?
Yeah, I haven't been involved in those conversations either, so I really couldn't say.
I think it's great. I have one more question about the census. Has the governor's office or the Department of Commerce identified areas in particular where they're particularly concerned about getting an accurate count or a complete count?
Did you ask have they?
Yes, have they
Yes.
identified?
Yes, they have, and their goal right now is to have coalitions in each area. Of course, in our rural areas and our Indian reservations, it's probably not. They don't have those set up right now, I will say. They're still working on that. I know that they're always looking to get people signed on. I think it's ceic.mt.gov if anyone wants to go look at those, where there are census folks already signed up in communities. And if you have ideas of others, I know the Department of Commerce would be really thrilled to hear from you.
You caught my attention in your handout with $20,000 per student over the decade.
It's pretty interesting.
That's real money.
It is real money, and this is just K-12. This is just federal government money.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Of course.
Yes, and updating and checking on the stairs.
Yes. I really swear to God did not do that.
But during a break, we can go out and do a short little walk.
Yes. Yeah, do a walk around of the facility.
Staff did do a ribbon cutting.
Did they?
Oh. All right. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the state librarian's report.
Thanks, Ann. And I have a couple of other staff that are going to share updates based on some commission questions. First, I just want to, again, continue to highlight some of the progress that we're making, I think, in the overall use of different kinds of reporting tools. You have in your commission materials snapshots of instance of a Tableau dashboard that Jessica Edwards has created. Jessica Edwards was hired in October as our new data coordinator. And so she's taking the information that's provided by staff in the work plan spreadsheet and organizing that information into a dashboard. She couldn't be with us today. She's in Albuquerque for the National Library Data Coordinators meeting. There is a reader version of the Tableau software that we will make available to all of the commissioners, so you have the opportunity to have a more dynamic view of this reporting dashboard. And at your February meeting, Jessica is also going to walk us through some of the different kinds of reporting options that are available to Tableau that might help present the kinds of information that's in our work plan reports to you in more informative ways. So I look forward to having her at that February meeting so that you can continue to learn more about the reporting options that are available, and we can continue to improve our overall reporting to the agency. But I'm really pleased that we have someone on staff now that can actually help us do this kind of work and continue to make improvements, both for your information as well as the overall agency planning. And then also in your report is an infographic that describes the the Research Institute for Public Libraries regional conference that was held in Billings at the first part of October, the RIPPLE conference. A number of our staff attended. As you can see by the infographic, there were attendees from around the state as well as around the country. As our staff always do, we did some great evaluation work about the overall impression and impact of that conference, and that information is also provided you in this kind of infographic. This is another example of how Jessica will be working with staff to help us assess the impact of the various work that we're doing. So as more projects reach completion, you can expect to see more of this kind of information in your overall state library report. Just wonder if there's any kind of reaction to this information that I can share with Jessica at this time.
I like seeing these kind of graphical representations of data.
I'm excited to share them with staff as well. I know they're very interested in seeing this.
On the Ripple participation map, the 7 people. Oh, sorry, that's one more. That's why I was just wondering if the Ripple staff were counted.
In terms of attendees, no, because they are from Colorado.
Right.
So moving on to some other topics that I wanted to highlight, as McCall said, we are very actively involved in the census. Mary Craigle, the director of CEICs, referred to libraries as a complete count committee in and of themselves because of all of the great work that they're doing. We've held a number of trainings. We continue to have webinars with the library community, and we're involving both U.S. Census employees as well as employees from CEIC to help make those as informative as possible for the library community. We've completed a librarian's toolkit, so librarians have ready access to information about opportunities they have to support the census as well as anticipated questions that they might get as we get closer and closer to the census. Census Day, April 1st, actually occurs during the Montana Library Association conference, and so a number of our librarians are not going to be in their libraries on Census Day, so we're planning a Census Week later in April for libraries to encourage people to take the census in libraries. And then we're also planning, and it's not too late to complete the Census Day in early June as a way to continue to encourage people who may not have completed the census at that point to make sure that they're doing so. So very, very active group of librarians all around the state supporting the census. I really, really want to commend especially Joe Flick and Tracy for all of their hard work in organizing all of the trainings and the toolkit and in really engaging with partners at the census to make sure that libraries are well prepared. You know, we know that people are coming to libraries and we want librarians to be as prepared as possible to meet their needs. There are a couple of other highlights in the State Library report that I just wanted to draw to your attention as we use this more dynamic tool to continue to keep up to date on the various projects that are going on within the State Library. I wanted to highlight a couple that are delayed, one of which is from a trust request. We made a trust request last summer to provide funding for a web rewrite for the State Library website and including a graphic redesign of the website. Staff did go out for a limited solicitation for that project over the summer, and we really didn't get any viable responses to that limited solicitation. And so, given other staff IT priorities, we've tabled that project for now and hope to get to it later in the spring.
Do you have any insight as to why you didn't get any solicitations?
Some, and I think some of it may need addressing. We build our website on a in-house content management system, and a number of the respondents wanted to move us to a WordPress system, which the state does not support. The state currently supports DNN, which is, I believe, a Microsoft product. We used it for a short period of time, and it really wasn't meeting our needs, and so that's when staff built an in-house content management system. I think part of the challenge is finding a contractor who'd be willing to work with that content management system. In the solicitation, we also asked for feedback about a possible move to DNN, and we didn't really get any viable responses to that. And just in the last week, the state has announced that they are looking into alternatives to DNN. So some delays there. Evan, I don't know if you have any additional insights.
No, but just wanted to clarify. I don't think, I could be wrong with this, I don't think DNN is a Microsoft product, but it's the CMS that's based on .NET Microsoft platform versus WordPress, which is PHP based.
The .NET Nuke.
That was the original.
The original name, yep. So that project is temporarily on hold as we better understand what the state's strategy is going to be for web content management and how that might impact our administration of our own content management system. And then just simply due to the limited number of IT staff we currently have, staff are behind on a migration to of our server platform over at the State of Montana Data Center. They're working on migrating our server instances from Server 2008. We'd hope to get that done by the end of the year, but staff are behind on that project. I'm very, very happy to say that we're finally making progress on a performance management system. Staff have been working with the Department of Administration Human Resources Office to implement the state's performance management system so that we can continue to do regular performance management with our employees. It's been quite a learning curve, and the state has been making updates and enhancements to the overall system that's delayed that progress. But at this point, Melissa and Evan and I have successfully created goals and gone through an evaluation period within the performance management system, and after the new year we'll be rolling this out to our leads and then to the rest of the staff. So I'm looking forward to having that system in place. I know Melissa's looking forward to having that system in place as well.
Jenny, jumping back, I apologize. Just a question on the infographics and things. Is there a? I mean, these are in PDF form, but one of them looks dynamic. The first one will look dynamic with you can choose different filters and things. But is there like a landing page or a way that we could do we go back through the meeting minutes to access those, or can they be sort of consolidated, particularly the ones that change a lot? Because it's really useful to compare.
As they're developed, that's a great suggestion to have kind of a landing page. The Tableau itself will be kind of dynamic, but for the periods of these meetings, having some kind of record of that. Is that what you're at?
Yeah, so you could go in one place and find it instead of having to search through which meeting was that that we talked about.
That's a great, helpful recommendation. And I don't know that we'll always be set on Tableau. I know Jessica's experimenting with insights and other kinds of tools that may best reflect the kinds of information depending on the kind of project and evaluation tools that we're doing. But that's a great suggestion. And then finally, I just wanted to remind the Commission that the next meeting of the Interim Education Subcommittee of the Legislature is meeting on Monday, December 16th to continue their House Bill 633 study of funding for the State Library. We talked at your October meeting about some potential funding recommendations for different kinds of funding models that were intended to really spark some brainstorming amongst the subcommittee about potential funding models. And then we also looked at sort of a proposed model budget for the State Library that more accurately reflects the costs of the current services that we're offering, as well as demands for new services that are not currently funded. So the agenda as it stands for the meeting on December 16th is a review of those two documents from me. And I don't know that there's any other agenda items for that subcommittee pertaining to the House Bill 633 study at this time. So I'm glad that our efforts to really shape that discussion seem to be playing out.
Do you have the time and the room for that, please?
Just take a minute.
I'm showing at 9 o'clock. Is that correct?
I think she said we're scheduled for around 11 or 11:20.
They had 9 o'clock too, so it must have been that at some point.
Yep, I think that's when the meeting starts, and then we're a little bit later in the agenda, and it's room 102 in the Capitol.
How many commissioners would that be useful to have in attendance?
How many we should have in attendance? 1 or 2, I think would be great.
Okay. I can attend that.
Great.
So 11 o'clock.
We're on the agenda at 11. I would plan to be there a little bit early in case they're
Fair
moving
enough.
more quickly, and if they're moving more slowly, we can let you know.
Fair enough.
I have invited Amy Marchwick and Jennifer Brunel to give a couple of updates. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to go first and talk about the scope of the Montana Memory Project and some changes that advisory group has been talking about.
So I handed out a handout to you all that has our scope on it, listed as our current revised scope. It has come to my attention over the years, and especially in the last year, that we have several institutions that would contribute content to the Montana Memory Project, but they're slightly outside of our current scope. And I'd like to broaden our scope just a little bit so that we can do a better job of including Montana materials. And I'll give you 4 examples that I've heard in the recent months. The Charles Bear Family Museum out of Martinsville, all of the families can read their papers, their photographs. A lot of those are
Please mute yourselves again.
So they have a lot of things that are in Oregon or of Oregon, but they're part of the entire family collection in its entirety. Another example is has the Sharp photographs. Sharp was a photographer who traveled the country taking pictures of Native Americans, and so there's a lot of them from different states. However, they're all held by one of our museums in the state, and I feel like that's a worthy collection to consider. The Montana Museum, the Museum and Art Guilds Directors Association, MAGDA, invited me to speak at their conference this year, and the art directors were very excited about the Montana Memory Project and the idea of being able to share some work. But a lot of the content of the artwork from Montana artists is not Montana, and so you kind of draw this fuzzy line about is it Montana culture and Montana history related then. Because the artists are, I would argue that yes, they are, and so would the arts directors who said, yes, we'd like to include this information. A perfect example of this is Barbara Van Cleve, the photographer who just donated all of her work to the Historical Society. Her photographs and her work are from all over, but she is a Montana woman and calls herself a Montana native. I would love to be able to include that from the Historical Society. And then finally, the U.S. Forest Service is building a museum in Missoula. And they are doing a huge building campaign right now. They have Forest Service images from all over the country. They are currently sharing those on Past Perfect online, which they're paying for as a separate fee at an expense to them. And it's limited in its scope how many photos they can share. They would love to be able to share with the Montana Memory Project, but again, they don't want to pull out Montana-specific U.S. history or Forest Service photos. They would like to share those again in their entirety. So those 4 things have made me really think about the scope of the MMP and what we're collecting and how we're sharing that. And we've been very consistent over the last several years that it has to be about Montana history and about Montana culture to be on the Montana Memory Project. I had a great conversation with Wendy Walker from the University of Montana and with Molly Krugenberg from the Historical Society about this, and they're both in agreement that we should look at including some of these things that are held by Montana institutions as defining the Montana experience. So the wording there that's highlighted is the addition, saying that the MMP would include digitized historic and contemporary resources that reflect the Montana experience and that are important to understanding Montana's rich cultural heritage. And I think that broadens it enough that we aren't excluding those things that are held by Montana institutions, but also hopefully not broadening it so much that we overwhelm ourselves with too much unrelated content, which is the fine balance there.
Does this item doesn't require action? Is that correct?
It does not, but I want the Commission to be aware because as we expand the scope, this change does have the potential to continue to increase the workload for Jennifer, as well as just the workload to administer larger and larger collections.
Especially because of something like the National Forest Museum, which has thousands of photographs. I mean, that's a huge collection. And Jenny and I were talking, I looked back over my stats for the last 3 years. The last 2 years, I've added 24 new collections. The year before that, 19 collections. 24 is about the max I can handle. And considering the volume of some of these, that varies from year to year, depending on the experience and the people adding the content as well. So without another employee for the MFP, I'm maxed out. I'm doing about as much as I can do. So that's also something that, as we broaden the scope, we need to really pay attention to, because we would open the door for more institutions to contribute content.
But it strikes me that the changes you're suggesting will both better support our partners, which is incredibly valuable to me. And it also will, as Ranganathan says, save the time of the reader. I mean, the users will instead of having to look in the Van Cleef stuff in 12 different places, 12 different servers around the world, will be able to have a better chance of finding it in one. And that just strikes me as exactly what we're supposed to be doing as librarians.
Well, and it also opens that door for some of that stuff to actually get digitized and shared. Right now, the sharp stuff is sitting at the C.M. Russell Museum, and you have to know it's there and go and ask to see it, and you would never get to see that.
ESP.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's terrific.
Same with a lot of the art museums that have great Montana artwork or Montana artists' work, but they aren't able to share that at this point.
It seems to me that if the Great Falls Art Museum, what's it called? What is the
Charlie Russell.
Charlie Russell, but there's the other one. Doesn't matter.
Paris Gibson.
Paris Gibson. If Paris Gibson has a permanent collection on Stalingrad, by the virtue of it being Paris Gibson, it seems like we have some.
They were very excited that I was, because I visited with them this fall as well. That was one I didn't include in my examples, but I did go to the Paris Gibson Museum and visit with the interim director there and the program director there. And they were saying if we fit the scope, then they would definitely contribute.
Because our users associate that exhibit, whatever it is, with Paris Gibson. We're saving the time of the user by giving them easy access to those materials. No brainer.
I guess I just have a question about, with this, with smaller Montana collections, I mean, would they get priority on, I mean, I know the changing the scope, but are we kind of running out of those smaller Montana collections, or?
No, we have plenty of those,
Okay.
and this isn't going to, by any means, disrupt those. It's just going to open the door for some of those institutions that don't have a current way to share that content to have a way to share. But no, I don't feel like that's going to interrupt that process of working with the small museums or small libraries to digitize and get their content available. We'll still have the funding for some digitization efforts, which is currently open, and I only have 2 applicants for, so.
Others may ask that.
Yeah. So, thank you. Yeah.
Jennifer's current priority in terms of trying to bring in new collections is to make sure that there's collections from every county in the state, and she's nearing that goal.
We're missing 11 right now, so we're getting.
Yep. Any other questions for Jennifer?
Just a comment, having fought the Bear Museum fight, that would have, if the bank would have won, so much would have been lost. In spite of their, we love the museums, rent. So it's really important that those kinds of collections are available to all of the public, not just a very small group of people in a bank board meeting.
And that was a phenomenal collection that they had there at the museum. They're very interested in making that accessible to the public. So I was really excited about that.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad you could be here. And then Amy is going to talk about the relationship amongst the shared catalog libraries that have opened up their user sharing walls and allow for freer access and sharing of their materials, and some of the challenges that those libraries are facing right now, and what Amy's doing to help them, Amy and the other shared catalog staff. Amy, did you want to come to the table? So
Yeah, I can
should have asked Jennifer as well.
So the Montana Shared Catalog Partners is a group of 36 libraries right now, I think, libraries and branches that do, they have, as Jenny said, opened their user sharing borders. The patrons of those libraries can use their card at any of those libraries. They can simply place a hold without staff mediation, without extra help in the online card catalog for an item owned by any of those libraries, and it transitions its way across the state and shows up in their home library or whichever library they happen to want to pick it up at. So it's a great resource for patrons, and it smooths the interworkings for the libraries. But they have, as they've grown over the years, they're running into some some challenges in terms of how sharing is fair. They have very, very large libraries in this group and very, very small libraries in this group with very huge disparities in their funding and their budget. And there is some of the libraries that are larger, their general mission right now is that everything they own is shared amongst all of them. But there's a function where you can buy an extra copy and save that just for your patrons. And there's arisen some feelings that that's not fair because the holds at the larger libraries will still pull items off the smaller library shelves, even though they have a copy reserved for their patrons or for patrons who haven't placed a hold. There's just a lot of we're hit the peak of how it works, and now we're running into those growing pains of what's the best way to make this fair? Is it percentage of budget? Should people be able to shelter things for those browsing patrons who might never place a hold? They just want to find something on the shelf. And sort of this philosophical discussion combined with budget discussion combined with what the software itself can configure, because we don't want to add extra burden on the librarians who are fulfilling these holds and pulling items, make it more complicated for them to have to do a bunch of stuff manually. We want the software to be able to help maintain that process. So we have had several discussions with them. We're running surveys asking them what they think is fair, what they think would work best for the patrons, what would work best for the libraries. I don't know that we have an answer yet at this point. We've had lots of suggestions. Maybe everybody gets to what we call hold shelter, all of their new stuff for just their patrons for a few months. That raises some difficulties in that if your library is so small and your budget doesn't afford all of those brand new items, you have to wait then until they become available, because ordinarily you would have a couple of options to get them from one of the larger libraries. Or if you have a specialized collection that isn't being bought at all the libraries, then so that's one option. To completely take all of the sheltering away is another option. But then that means that your general browsing public who doesn't place holds is not going to see any of that new stuff again for about that 6-month period until the hold queues are empty. So we're soliciting opinions or ideas from various places. We're experimenting with some things that in the configuration might help. We have had the idea from our team of a leased collection where we lease from the publishers those new popular materials so that we would have extra copies of them that would be a shared collection that would belong to all of them equally and could float and just land wherever it landed to help ease some of those hold burdens. But then at the end, we wouldn't have 60 or 70 copies of an item that's no longer has that demand on it. We wouldn't have spent the money. We could replace that with the new popular items. So that's that.
But what does the data show in terms of the flow of materials from smaller and larger libraries? Years ago, larger libraries had more different titles, so there was more depth to the collection. Smaller libraries had smaller populations, kind of borrowing from a much smaller collection. And it turned out that in many cases amongst the partners, that there was a net flow of materials from small libraries to big libraries, not because of the depth of the collection, but because in small communities, things became accessible quicker. There was a smaller population of people reading against that collection, and so things became available quicker. Is that data still true, or has that changed?
That's mostly still true. The depth and the breadth of the larger libraries' collections means that there are things that the smaller libraries don't own, entire runs of manga series, stuff like that is just beyond the budget of a smaller library. Those tend to get pulled to the smaller libraries, but the new popular material, I think it's a population thing. Like you said, there'll be 160 patrons on the hold list from the Imagine If libraries, and so the hold list gets filled faster at the smaller libraries, or those patrons aren't placing holds, and so then stuff is pulling from the smaller libraries to the larger libraries.
So is it an instance then that much of the friction is small libraries feeling that materials are disappearing from their building and are unavailable to their patrons?
I think that's definitely a facet of it. There's that's one of the major things, is that they're like, it's not here for our patrons. Our board members are wondering where our new stuff is.
I'm trying to identify the squeaking wheel. Is it smaller libraries, not larger libraries, or is it both?
I think in terms of the overall issue, it's probably both. It's everybody is like, this isn't quite working for anyone. The benefits right now, I think, are leaning towards the larger libraries. So this was brought up in this instance by some of the smaller to medium-sized libraries, but I think overall, as the discussion has happened over the last 6 or 8 months, even maybe almost a year, it has sort of widened its scope as they realize that it's
If your staff had a magic wand, and it was able to wave it, what would be the fix?
I think that's a really good question. I feel like that is where we're coming down to the problem. One of the sort of proposed magic wand, we have another smaller sharing group that does shelter all of their new stuff for 6 months, and that seems to work well for them. But they also they're smaller libraries, they still buy all that new stuff, so they're not being prohibited from placing holds even to wait. And so we don't know. If I had a magic wand, I don't know that we know what the solution is. I have considered, turning that function on where everybody gets to keep their new stuff for a little while for just their patrons, so that they can see it on the shelf, just to see how it goes. But we don't know how disruptive that would be. I'm not unwilling to try something just because we don't know if it would work. But
that was my next question and last. Thank you for your indulgence. I was wondering if the partners have enough resilience that they could stand some experiments to try it this way for 6 months or a year, and try something else until we hit upon something. Because it sounds like we don't know what the magic bullet is. We don't know how to fix it.
yeah, I don't think we do know how to fix it. I mean, like I said, we can turn it all shelter, we can make it so that nobody holds, but we don't actually know that either of those will solve the intrinsic problems as well as the perception that the libraries have. I think that the partners, I would say that they probably are resilient enough that we can try something for 6 months to a year.
Or maybe even a subgroup of partners could be the test scratch dummies.
Yes, and we've also discussed that perhaps this isn't a one-size-fits-all problem. Perhaps the issue is that the small libraries need to shelter for a little while, and the large libraries can shelter a portion of what they've got because they get multiple copies, and so that's a possibility as well. And that might work the best because they're different libraries and different communities with different budgets. It's possible that we don't have a one-size-fits-all solution here.
It sounds like the problem's in good hands.
I think the problem's in excellent hands for certain. This is
glad it's not me.
Yeah, this is really an example of where we lean on the Fair Library Access Resolution that the Commission was adopted as sort of our guiding principle as we think about how we can best address the solutions and continue to focus on resource sharing and helping libraries understand the value of cooperation, the value of resource sharing, trust in one another is a huge component of all of this. And then the great leadership from staff.
Just one question. Are there stats that, I think I do the worst job at question development. So are there stats that could help with collection development that libraries, maybe they can see, especially the smaller libraries, what their patrons are requesting from the other libraries to potentially help with future purchases? Maybe, they're not purchasing what their patrons want, but this is a really great way to figure out what they want because they're pulling the holes in the larger libraries.
That is a very good question, and we do have some of those stats about what's being, if they place it on hold, we're seeing what's pulled. We haven't I don't know, looked at it necessarily in that way. What we are seeing is that there are some, the things that libraries are buying, various libraries, is not necessarily what their patrons are checking out. So we are seeing that that's a thing where, you know, we had a pilot where we tried doing so that the libraries could pull stuff in a shelter for like a week or so temporarily, and the things that those libraries pulled and kept on their shelves then didn't check out. So we do have some issues where we think, oh, I'll pull in this bestseller, but nobody in my library who wanted to read that comes in that week, so it's hard to tell. Also, the majority of the circulation at these libraries, that's is only 2% of partner cert is solo mediated. So the majority of the circulation at any of these libraries is people coming in and finding something off the shelf. So this isn't a huge portion of their circulation, but it's a really visible portion of their circulation.
Not that you have to provide it, but I would love to have more training in collection development.
Well,
that's a good thing to make it out in the world. But
yeah, what to buy when.
Yeah.
And I think with the 187 libraries in the shared catalog, since we know what's being created as new items and how it's circulating and where, I think that would be a good tool for sort of, you might want to look at these things that aren't maybe on the bestseller list, but it's moving really fast in like Lewistown or something. So that's a really good idea there.
One of the interesting differences that we have in collection development in Montana libraries is the cooperative collection development that goes on within Montana Library to Go for ebook and e-audio, and really limited, if any, kind of cooperative collection development for print materials. And I think the ideas of a leased collection, I think some of the questions that you're raising really lend themselves to thinking more about cooperative collection development for print materials in libraries and trying to encourage that.
This also smells like it's a problem that could be helped by machine learning and AI. And it's sort of embarrassing that that's just not something that is part of our system. But just, it strikes me that this is we have lots of data, but it sounds like to me like we're sort of using it manually. Instead of having something help us, a little digital assistant saying, we should be buying more copies of Tuba Technique, or whatever. Maybe not Tuba Technique.
Jenny, this is Kylie. Is it okay if I jump in here really quickly? Because it was great that someone asked about training and kind of what we're discussing right now. So I'm Kylie, I'm the MSc trainer, and I just wanted to jump in and say that Rebecca Camp and I did do a couple of trainings on collection management this year, both in Bozeman and Sydney, Montana, for MSL workshops, using our Blue Cloud Analytics data to help people make data-informed decisions about their collections. Just to reassure you guys that that is definitely something that we are trying to address.
Thanks, Kylie.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions for Amy?
Could we have a revisit of this or be briefed again when there's more to know about how this is being resolved?
Yes.
Because I think it seems like it's a really important thing.
And I think it's a long-term fix. I don't think, unless somebody comes up with that genius idea that's the magic bullet. I think the partners are meeting again in late January. So we'll hopefully have a little movement some way or another, some things to suggest. They might come up with some more ideas.
I feel a need to kind of stay on top of it as a commissioner, but I think it's also important that we signal that the commission is interested in this and considers this a critical part of our strategic overall program. If this breaks, we're in really big trouble, and as it thrives, we're sitting pretty.
Yeah, it's definitely our flagship program for sharing materials.
Yes.
So
yeah,
we're doing the work on the ground of moving those things around.
Good. I'm going to conclude my report with just a quick staffing update. We continue to make some hires. Of course, Amy was hired as the lead Montana Shared Catalog System Administrator. And as you all know, we've made the decision to hire another system administrator for the shared catalog. That recruitment is nearing conclusion as we make an offer to a likely candidate. When we hired Jessica Edwards as our data coordinator, she was also an internal candidate, and so our outreach and electronic resources librarian position was then vacant. We are conducting interviews for that position on Monday. I think we have 3 or 4 candidates that are being interviewed for that position. And then we're in the process of hiring 2 permanent GIS techs as well as a 3rd GIS tech that will work on our NRCS contract. We have 50 applicants as of the closing of that recruitment period on Monday, and so staff are screening applicants for that position, and we'll be conducting interviews once the screening is concluded. I understand it's a really, really exceptional pool for that position.
50.
Mm-hmm.
Well.
Any other questions for me about anything that was in the report that I did or didn't talk about? Okay, no, okay, good. Can we move to Melissa to give your first quarter financial report?
We met with the Finance Committee on November 25th of last month. And as most of you know, we are several months into having a brand new Finance Committee, so that's really exciting. I have people to talk about my work with. The first thing we talked about were the first quarter financial reports. So you can see on the first page of the PDF document a summarized chart of the results of our first quarter. So we are 25% of the way through the year, but you can see that our total expenses are only at 15%. So we have some catching up to do. The personal services overall is expended at 17%. So that relates to what Jenny was just talking about, the personal services dollars that were added back into our budget during the last session. And we're in this period of time where we're hiring these positions, and so it's causing some vacancy savings. So like you heard Jenny say, we have lots of interviews going on, and we are working to get those positions filled, so we will expend those dollars that were appropriated to us. And then as far as our operating expenses, where we have expended 18% of those, so that is also behind the 25% that's our target for this point of the year. And that's mostly a timing issue, partly related to our IT costs. We, as of the end of the first quarter, we hadn't recorded those expenditures yet. There was an invoicing error with IT, and we were given the option to wait until those were corrected in the following invoice. And so there was a delay in paying those. So that's part of the reason that we're behind in our expenditures. Also, we have some one-time only monies yet that we had not expended during the first quarter. And then grants are 0% expended. About 2/3 of that is due to our federation payments and our state aid that did go out during the very beginning of the second quarter. So we caught up pretty quickly. You'll see that in my next report when I go over second quarter. So I'm not concerned about that at all. And the MWIA grants are the remaining amount of that, which is a slow rollout of those invoices that come into us. So everything's looking pretty good as far as our expenditures go. Oh, I'm sorry.
One second.
Sure.
Is there a reason that we don't project this up on the screen for the audience?
Okay. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
We could.
God.
The first quarter financial
Go
report.
perfect. Thank you. It was that other brand of computer.
I'm not sure where you're at, so.
That's it.
That's where she is right now.
That's where we So the second item that we talked about at our finance committee was our administrative costs and how we allocate those to our different funding sources. And like I said, we're several months into a new finance committee, so this is a learning experience for all of us. And my goal is to get everybody up to speed on some and get everybody involved on some decisions that we need to make. And so we focused on our SWAT cap invoice during this meeting. So for those of you that don't know, SWAT cap stands for statewide cost application plan. And so that's an invoice that we get once a year from the Department of Administration. And this cost is determined by an agreement between the governor's budget office and also the federal government. And it's essentially a way for the state to recoup costs for overhead or administrative costs that they incur that other funding sources benefit from. So good examples of that are having a well-developed HR department that all the agencies can rely on. Or, for example, having a general ledger accounting system that we can all utilize. And so when we get that invoice each year, we can allocate that to funding sources as we see fit. So we had a pretty thorough and in-depth discussion on how we wanted to record those expenses. And we decided that from now on, we will apply an average based on the number of FTE that are supported by 3 different funding streams, and those include the land information dollars, our federal LSTA grant, and also our proprietary fund, which is the shared catalog. So it was a really good discussion, and it's a fairly complicated topic, and so I'm glad that we were able to talk about that with our finance committee. And then lastly, we're monitoring our coal fund. It's a fairly new fund we've only had for a year or two, so we are watching those revenues come in to make sure that the cash in that account matches the appropriation that we were given, and that we can't overspend that fund, but that we spend the funds according to the cash that's coming in. So as of the first quarter, we were at 20% of revenue, so that's pretty close, and I think that's definitely a timing issue because it's the beginning of the year, and there's a little bit of a lag and delay in how those revenues are recorded. So I will continue to monitor that, and we'll continue to talk about that at the Finance Committee.
One of the things that I find helpful with these financial reports is you've simplified the presentation, and I'm grateful for that. I do value the kind of the year-to-date kind of thing and last year-to-date, and I realize we're changing format some, so we can't do the year-looking back thing. But when that becomes available, that'd be good. I always have to do math in my head, which is a problem, but it's to hear, for instance, that we're 20%, we've received 20% of our coal severance tax funds. It would be good to know how far are we into the fiscal year. I mean, what percentage?
These reports are as of the first quarter, which would be 25%.
So 25%. Okay, so it would be that number kind of showing how. So I can see that expenditures and revenues are timed for as we're going through the year. That's helpful slightly. I recall another board experience watching, near the end of the fiscal year, still seeing 80% of a fund unexpected, and that was actually a sign that program was in trouble, and that I think is useful for us commissioners, or to me.
Is there any other public comment on the first quarter financial report or on the new format for reporting? Does everyone feel like they're getting the information that they're needing from this new format? And thank you, Melissa, for taking the lead on this really simplified format. And it'll be interesting as we go through the year to see if there are any tweaks, like you just suggested, of additional things that would be helpful to add to the reports.
Which just add complexity and make it harder to read. But
right, which was our goal, but it's a fine line. Yeah, we want to give enough information.
What?
Make money easy.
Well, I do like that, but what I always worry
That's a goal.
is timing is so important, as you said in your presentation.
Yeah.
It just is good. That's a good piece of information.
Yeah.
I'm willing to endure complication for that.
If I may also commend Melissa, as you all know, she sort of completely restructured how we do our overall budgeting. You'll recall from adoption of the budget at the start of the fiscal year into these project budgets. And if I may quote Tracy, Tracy had to pull some information about the cost of the Ripple conference for some of the reporting to the commission. And Tracy told me it took her longer to turn on her virtual machine than to find that information.
Oh, yay. Oh, yay.
Good job.
What was the acronym for the state support?
SWAC.
SWACAP.
SWAC
Yeah,
out.
SWCAP.
Any other public comment on this item? All right, we'll move into. Oh, it's an action item, so we do need to approve it. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you. And so we'll move into the study. Let's see, it's 10:48. I think we're good for breaks. We'll move into the study administration of the Natural Heritage Program, which is an action item. And I'll hand that over to Jenny to begin the conversation.
Great. Well, as the commission is aware, we first told the commission at your August 29th meeting that we were considering how we administer the program and wanted to take some time to analyze whether or not we were doing that most effectively. We had a conversation with Bryce at your October meeting, and we've spent the last 4 months talking with staff, talking with the university. We met with the Governor's Office of Budget and Program Planning. We've sought legal counsel around questions of financial capacity to administer the program, as well as impacts to the staff and our overall vision and goals for the program. I think the concerns that really set about this study were concerns with regard to the long-term stable funding for the core services contract. And as you know, and as you've seen year after year, the core funding has declined dramatically. It's starting to come back somewhat, but even that amount of funding has not at all kept pace with the costs for administering the services. And as you've seen from reports from Bryce, we have less and less ability to meet those core service functions that are required of us by statute. And as I told the commission and I told staff, I'm becoming increasingly concerned that perhaps having the administration of the program handled under a contract is contributing to that overall concern, because it's very confusing when we get up in front of a legislative body and even in my communications with staff about where the program resides, how it's operated, who has responsibility for ensuring the program's overall success. And in the last 8 years that I've been state librarian, and prior to that, we've had zero ability to impact the amount of funding that comes to the overall program. As we've gone through the process of conducting our evaluation, which is summarized in the proposal to you, what's really occurred to me and to staff is that when you contract for something, you are typically contracting for deliverables on a service. And I'm not familiar with any other kinds of contracts where you're actually handing over the administration of a program. It made sense at the time when the state library was first given the Natural Heritage Program in statute in 1985 that the state library would look at contracting for the program. The Nature Conservancy was standing up these programs all around the country in various states and Canadian provinces, and they had the expertise to develop and operate these programs that the state library didn't have.
And of course, over the years, as the Natural Resource Information System developed, and as we developed the Land Information Act and all of the work conducted under the Act, we did develop much of that kind of expertise, and we work very collaboratively with the staff of the Natural Heritage Program. So that's less of a concern for the State Library. And I think it's right now then to consider whether or not it's appropriate to contract for the administration of a program that we are statutorily responsible for, as opposed to continuing contracts for delivery of specific kinds of services. I want to say very clearly that in all of our communication with staff and with the university, we've said, and I continue to say, that we want to maintain a continuing mutually beneficial relationship with the university. We recognize, and staff and partners recognize, that that relationship is really critical to the success of the program. We also know that there's opportunities to continue to partner with others, both existing partners as well as potential future partners that we want to keep in mind. That's really the thinking and rationale behind looking at how we administer the program, and advising the Commission that we need to take seriously our responsibility and our obligation for the stability and the strategic future of the program. And I don't think that those are responsibilities that you can simply contract to someone else. I also want to say very clearly that there's nothing in the intent of this proposal that would change the day-to-day workings of the staff of the Natural Heritage Program. We remain absolutely committed to the data and services of the Natural Heritage Program, of meeting contract obligations, and of meeting the needs of the partners. I'll remind the Commission that under the contract with the Heritage Program, the data that's developed is actually the data of the State Library, and all of that data belongs to the State Library, and it's created for the purposes of maintaining the Natural Resource Information System. Of course, meeting our partners' needs. And as I said at the partners meeting on November 25th, and as is stated in the proposal, we continue to measure the success of the program based on the success of our partners. And we want to make sure that the data and services that are developed reflect their needs, reflect the input on their future needs, and that we continue to strive to create the best possible data and services to meet their overall needs. I think this is more of a philosophical question than it is a question of contracting. I think the question is, are we comfortable with contracting for the stability and the strategic direction of a program that we have statutory responsibility for or not? And depending on how we want to approach that, considering how we can continue to contract for those aspects of the program that make the most sense to contract for. And again, as I said, I hope in a mutually beneficial way with the University of Montana.
Is that what you have for now? And so we'll take public comment on that. If you're online, just feel free to please jump in.
Hopefully I can
Scott.
start.
Yes, please.
I'm Scott, as I said earlier, I'm the Vice President for Research and Creative Scholarship and Dean of the Graduate School at the University of Montana. It was so good seeing so many of the commissioners at our last partners meeting. I think we all heard it, that being very much concerned about proposed change in the moving of the contract away from the University of Montana. I think it was even more concern, and I think a lot of people said, well, we've got a really great program they're running. This is actually one of the best heritage programs in the country. And the partnership between the Montana State Library and the University of Montana is what's responsible for making this program as good as it is. The University of Montana is strongly opposed to moving the contract. I earlier sent the commission members all the reasons I think this will lead to a significant decrease in the revenue for the Heritage Program. The plan that's put forward implies that the Heritage Program can actually manage these grants and contracts. Even though Darlene is great as a grants administrator, we manage the grants and contracts for this program. I have two pre-award and post-award people in my office of sponsored programs that actually manage the contracts, the subcontracts, track the expenditures, and make sure that we're actually meeting the needs of our sponsors and meeting those projects we've been assigned to. I earlier had met with Bryce and Jenny to present a way to sort of maintain the funding for the program at a level that's actually higher than what they currently have. And I thought actually where we were headed. So I was a little surprised to see that this is still on the agenda. Because if this is about the funding for the program, then we can address that separately. So I'm not sure why the push is to move the contract. I think it's going to be very detrimental to the program and to a very well-run program. I also think if it's about working with the state legislature to fix some of the issues with the program, the Montana University system is ready and willing to help in that negotiations and communications. So I think this would be very devastating to the Heritage Program. Like I say, we're strongly opposed to moving the contract. Thank you for your time.
I have a question. Can I ask you? Are you accepting questions?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
If there's anything that earlier thing I sent you that you sort of have questions or concerns about, I'm more than willing to answer.
I have a number of things, but is the one that you're referring to, the one that you sent at 4:45 yesterday that I got at 7? Is that the earlier content, or was there earlier content?
That is the one that you've seen, and I sent it that early.
The last, the one last night.
Yes.
And you've been involved in the conversations since mid-October?
Actually, I would say, I hate to put Bryce and Buddy on the spot. We've had, I guess, 3
Mid-October,
or 4
Bryce?
conversations over the last
August
10.
Okay. So did something change last night? Because I hadn't heard the concerns until last night, so I'm wondering if there was
I thought we had an agreement on a different way to move forward. So I was surprised.
from your conversations with Bryce.
Bryce and Jenny both.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
Well, I would like to say that the tone of your letter surprised me and disappointed me. I thought that we were collegial partners, not in an adversarial relationship, and I really was offended by your letter. And I also take exception with your characterization of the partner meeting. I heard ambivalence about how the program was administered and intense interest in the program being fiscally, financially stable and moving forward. I just think, I'm sorry you sent this letter. And if you hadn't sent this letter, I wish you'd sent it in time for us to discuss it with you before we came to a public meeting. I just think this is not the cowboy way. So.
Thanks, Bruce.
I've got a lot of questions about this whole thing, but and I have a specific question though that I'm not sure we might get into a little bit later in the discussion. But I in terms of the indirect cost and the amount that's returned, I think it's important to get the report. Our report, the State Library's report, didn't give me enough information to know, what the 18% indirect cost rate for the university really means in terms of, because it looks like I'm not very good at math, I'll admit that. But it looks like it's closer to 8% with the give back to the program. I'd like more information on that, perhaps later, or as we go through the discussion. In general, my concerns with this, first let me say that it's probably the second most difficult decision that I've thought about and worked with this commission in the 5 years I've been on it. And the other one was, of course, the budget cuts, which were way more devastating, but I felt then we had kind of our hands tied behind our back. With this one, we don't have our hands tied behind our back. So, and this is much more nuanced and difficult. And so I don't know where to begin to characterize it, but I've got, I was at the Heritage meeting at the Partners meeting, and I've gone to most of them, I think. They're among the best. I would say we're not only one of the best, but the best heritage program in the country.
Agreed.
And I really get a lot out of those partner meetings, and commend the staff and Bryce and the university and others and the State Library for putting those on. They're a tremendous way to spend a day learning about the different agencies. And I picked up on, both sides here, I'm not sure I want to just pick the sides, but have different perceptions of that meeting. But I picked up on a lot of concerns, but also it was a lot of people that were interested in pursuing it. My biggest concern with all this is that the report came out way too late, and I'm getting emails this morning at 5 a.m. And it seems like we haven't. There's a lot that's still unsettled, and that's unfortunate that we haven't. That the Heritage partners didn't have some form of report on their table to review. And some of I have different concerns from the state, from federal perspective. The state perspective with Heritage, gives me a lot of concern. I work a lot with rural counties. It's a very conservative state, and I go to NACO every year, and I, hear the comments there from people. And I think I said this at the Heritage Partner meeting, but when we come down to push and shove, and the budget cuts are still too raw for me a couple of years ago, that's some of my biggest concerns and frightening about this whole process is when I go to NACO meetings and see, I work a lot with 911, public safety, fairly neutral, political, important public type of a thing, but even that pales with some of the discussions of crowded jails and opioid and crack kind of epidemics and all the things that I see the local government's concerned about. When they start, regardless that Heritage is non-regulatory, they start to they associate Heritage with threatened endangered species and things. And when you start, weighing bats and nematodes against, things that are important to rural conservative legislators, it scares me. I'm concerned about that. Putting all our kind of marbles in one basket. The other thing that in a general comment I have, and then I'll shut up for a while, but I'd like to see in our report more alternatives. I wonder, when I look at the details of this, there's some sticky parts, but the core services, I wonder if other alternatives had been discussed or could be, such as pulling part of the core services back, but leaving the important research components, not bringing 17 employees over and building a whole new contracting staff here, a bunch of, no matter what, they're going to be rookies with this. And I worked at the university, and there's a lot of potential pitfalls with all that and federal research issues and things. So, I'd be interested in having other alternatives besides this lump sum all in one type of thing, such as can we pull some core services back and leave a significant part of the university, or what those discussions would be in more detail with the university. So,
Ken, did you see that in the report that Jenny authored and that Bryce fully participated in? Did you see any reason that those alternatives were blocked by that recommendation? Did you see that? Did you read that as there is room for potential collaboration with any potential contractors?
The gist of it for me was like, this is the alternative, take it or leave it. I didn't see much. I mean, there certainly seems open for negotiations, but it seems to be on a fast track. And so
18 months.
To respond specifically to your question about bringing over some of the staff, but not all of the staff, that was a point of discussion repeatedly within different staff meetings, both all staff meetings with the Heritage Program staff, as well as individually with one-on-one meetings that I had with the staff. There were some staff who voiced that certain aspects of the program could come over to the library and some could remain with the university. I'm not sure exactly what Scott was referring to about an agreement, but I know that was something that we had talked about a little bit there. There was also strong concern that splitting apart the program would change the overall staff morale and the perception of what the program is. And staff also pointed to other programs that have kind of split responsibilities between different agencies and universities as programs that were not as successful. So those kinds of alternatives were weighed and discussed. As I said, there wasn't consensus amongst the staff in the feedback that they supplied to us. But we did consider those kinds of options in formulating this recommendation.
The other thing I appreciated Dr. Maynard's letter on the one thing that hasn't been talked about in the report or anywhere is the privacy issue that we've discussed a lot and is part of our core mission as the library. And I've worked a lot. I worked at the university and I've worked with land trusts and others, and that's another concern that that she raised that I think is really worth bringing into the report, and how we can handle that, being such an open institution, and we're dealing with sensitive landowner issues and things that require that level of discretion and privacy. It's not a big sticking point for me, but it's something that I think was not in the report that we need to think about and talk about.
Although it is on our agenda, it's been an object of discussion regarding who has access to which data.
Scott, I appreciate you stepping forward first. And if you need to come back, please do.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Henning, yes, please.
I think you've heard already from the commission that many of us are a little surprised and concerned about the lateness of the comments that we've been getting in the last day or two. One of the things that surprised me was to learn this morning that the Commissioner of Higher Education was not aware of this proposal until yesterday, I think is what is my understanding. Have you had conversations with the Commissioner about this in the last few months?
I had the conversation with the Commissioner directly, I think yesterday. I've had communications with the staff, I'd say probably about a month ago.
And I believe it was October 11th? Was that the first? It was early to mid-October. And so that was when I believe there was an agreement that we pulled in OCHI for those conversations.
I'm unaware. I saw in the report that there's some kind of implication of communications with the Commissioner's office. I am not aware of any communications from the library side with the Commissioner's office on this.
But there's been commissions from your side since October?
Only recently.
So no. Okay.
And to clarify that point, we've been working with staff of OCHI on the financial analysis.
Melissa has. Yeah. For, what would you say, a couple months?
At least probably 4 to 5 weeks.
Okay.
I just have to sort of address the comment that it seems like it came to you so late for me, because we earlier had I hate to throw anybody under the bus in this conversation. What I thought was an agreement about splitting, as you asked, the library services piece being one and the research course being one. I thought that was a done deal. That then didn't happen. Then we had another agreement, which I thought, in which I was going to increase the return of overhead off of the overhead that we collect off the supplemental core, which would more than offset the funding loss. I thought that was a done deal. And then that, like I say, I thought that was where it was at. And then suddenly I find it's still on the agenda. So.
I wish I knew more about those proposals. We certainly had conversations. The increasing of the supplemental core, that was news to me when Bryce mentioned it on Monday to me.
I believe you and I and Bryce were in that meeting together, so I find that interesting.
Bryce, do you have any input?
It seems like it's like a Paul Newman movie, So we have a failure to communicate. Are there things we can do to move forward from this point? I mean, I guess we would put that off till later, but.
Well, I think that's the thing. We have some comment, and then we figure out how we're going to move forward, because every single person in this room is interested in the success of the program.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think as commissioners, our responsibility is to ensure that the program continues forth, it gets stronger, the information that we are able to provide our partners and the people of Montana improves, becomes more current, becomes more comprehensive. And it seems to me that should be those should be our goals as commissioners, is to do what we can do to basically maximize that opportunity. For as long as I've been going to the heritage meetings, which are a highlight in my calendar year as a commissioner, I'm always so delighted by the activity of the partners and the cool things they're doing. I see the same damn graph. I see basically the buying power of our revenues continuing to slide down and our costs continuing to basically increase, and we keep doing the same thing without really addressing that fundamental problem. And I think it's irresponsible for me as a commissioner to try to balance that discrepancy, that delta, on the backs of our workers, who are terrific. The staff of the program are doing fabulous work, and I'm not keeping my part of the bargain if I continue to let this financial problem grow and grow until it finally breaks. We got to do something to fix that. And I was actually uncomfortable in the report with some of the presentations of not having all of the core funding being from really solid sources. That would make me, and I'm sure you too, happiest. I would like to see that the core of what Heritage does is funded by rock solid sources so that we can continue to grow and go forward. That the measure of our success is how people use our information and what it does for them. And doing nothing strikes me as a problem because it's not working and hasn't worked for a decade.
My question on that is, it does get back to a little bit to more details. Maybe this is a good time to ask this of Scott of the return to the program and more details on that. But again, I'm not very good at math, but the charts that were presented in the Heritage data show for core services, we're talking about a 200,000. If 2008 is the goal, we're going for 450,000. I'm unclear whether that's really what we need to maintain the quality. Probably is higher than that, but basically that 200,000 is what the graph shows. To get back to the 2008 level, at least in the chart.
Right, and I'm concerned that that's not enough to help us do
Right.
the job we need our users need us to do.
Right, and we need to define that what the goal really is, so we know, so we're clear on what our goal is. But the 18% is, by my math, is like roughly $356,000. And it sounds like, if I'm understanding this right, 30% of that, or 106,000, is coming back, and another 50,000 annually. I'm not sure why those were split into two components.
We're around 170,000.
170,000. So, I mean, so anyway, that's part of the discussion is what options we have to get partway there. Because it's a much bigger issue how we're going to get all the way there to the goal we need. And that gets into the federal and state sort of dynamics, politics, and various other things.
And I understand the concern, so if I speak on the turn, I understand the concern over the decline in the core funding itself, but there's been significant increases in the supplemental core and in the external funding we also received to help do a lot of the work as well. So, but there's to me a lot of focus on the core itself, which should be addressed. But the overall health of the program is still strong because all the other sources of funding we brought in.
So I'd like to talk about that. And one of the things on page 5 of the report is the concern that we're letting money drive the work rather than making strategic decisions. As someone who has, in a very small department, had at tops 10 different grants of varying sizes, it quickly becomes unmanageable. I understand that the university is a lot larger than my institution, but I can, if we are bringing in so many extra grants, are we actually focused on what we're supposed to do? So we have the state statute to do the core, and the university doesn't have to necessarily abide by that other than to try to fill that core. But the report is stating how it's happening by bringing other things in, and I know that you put just as much work into a $20,000 grant as you do a $200,000 grant. Like I said, granted, my institution is smaller, so I do a larger portion of all of the work that do grants. But I think that to me is a really big reason why we're having this discussion, why we're having this study, because if the money is pushing us in different directions, are we actually focused on what we have been tasked to do? So I think that's a big part of why we're having the discussion is the state library, is tasked to have specific information, but the funding's coming from other places and they want different things than what we need. So are we being strategic, or are we just searching for any money at any cost? So, I think that's definitely discussion to have.
It's a good discussion. I believe that Bryce and others have done a really good job of making sure that extra research they do, which researchers enjoy doing, fits within what the mandates are for the program.
as a researcher, I think we look forward to it, but at the same time, when it takes over our other duties, then we become overwhelmed. And that's my biggest fear of what's happening with our core. We're being overwhelmed with other things. And so I have some other questions. It just were like really specific to the report. So, one of the benefits employees would be giving up would be tuition waivers. How many staff currently use tuition waivers? I know that, our employees, are they long-term, full-time, and then we just bring in part-time to fill? How many, this is just a random question, but are they all like UM grads, or are we pulling from across the country? So, are we getting a wide pool of applicants for jobs? I have just a basic question about IDC and what is included in that, but I did some research, so I threw that out. I had a question about the academic databases, that, the research, you really do need to pull from that. And then I saw that not in the report, but in the staff questions. And then I did want to just mention that the Montana State Library partner collaboration really is top-notch. I feel like I've never, in all of my roles in Montana, that the state library really does the best job with collaboration. I felt like a lot of the letters of concern came off as very threatening, and to me that made me really feel threatened. And so I really have to absorb those, because I feel like a partner who threatens us is not a good partner. And it was frustrating to read those. And let's see. And then I just had another question about, I know that with like the shared catalog, with a lot of the LSTA, when we talk about overdrive, a lot of our other large contracts, we have it scheduled where we routinely look at those contracts to see if they're still viable. I don't know if this contract has that in writing, or if it's just been 18 years of, I don't know, I feel like not reviewing a contract leads to some, it leads to problems that, are there better options? And so potentially 18 years later, this is what we're doing right now, is asking, are there other options? So that's just a bunch of questions I had as I was reading that I wrote down, and then as I was reading the letters of the public comment. So,
thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Catherine Maynard. I'm the State Geospatial Analyst for the Montana Division of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I also sent written comments for if anyone didn't get a chance to read the information. And I'm not going to reiterate everything that I sent in my comments, but we've been partners with both the State Library and the Heritage Program for going on over 20 years. So we've provided financial support and partnership support to both entities, and I can't begin to say the amount of respect that we have for the library and also for the Heritage Program, the services that they've provided us. And I understand that there is a problem that this report has been trying to solve, and unfortunately, the information of the written report came to us late. So getting that on Monday and also after the partners meeting really didn't give us an opportunity for me to work with my leadership and all of us to put our heads together and say, how's the best way to respond to this? Because we're partners, we value the partnership, and we want to support the development of a viable solution. That said, I think the biggest takeaway message I'd like to leave with the Commission is that for our own internal purposes of investigating the implications to our agreements and to our contracting vehicles for transferring money to the Heritage Program through the library, we really need more time. Because in our age, and I think I can speak to, and I have in my written comments, that the situation that the NRCS is in is quite similar to most federal agencies. So that there's a variety of funding sources that have congressionally mandated spending authority attached to those. And every year it's a different ballgame on where that money might come from and how we can potentially transfer it to partners, either through cooperative agreements or through contracts. And it's complicated. And we have to I think the library's in this study has tried to address, well, it sounds like state agencies, no problem, in terms of that. But I think it's a little more involved for federal agencies and giving us all time to look into that, because so much of the funding for the program is dependent on agreements, and that's not something that just a contracting, an accountant without background in that type of breadth of agreements can just jump right in and hit the ground running on. So that would be a concern also. But again, just giving us time as partners to be able to say, okay, what from a financial standpoint, what would really be the impact in the short term and the long term? We really need more time to investigate that. The other thing I would say is that in our agency, we work with private landowners. And whether it's just a perception or a perception combined with reality, the association with the Heritage Program being under the University of Montana is extremely important. And I know from my long experience with the library, yes, it is non-regulatory, and yes, it is neutral, but private citizens view state agencies, any state agency, through a certain lens, and they view academia through a different lens. And so when we work with private landowners and they know that our information about wetlands, threatened and endangered species is coming from the Heritage Program, there is a degree of confidence in both the integrity of the data and the privacy issues that they have. And that's extremely important. And I have no doubt that the library would do everything in its power to maintain the integrity of the data and address the privacy concerns. That said, as a state agency, there's potential for future legislation that could influence the potential for regulation, basically, and for making some type of regulation that says, hey, this data has to be provided in such and such a way or not. So those are things that none of us can see in the future, but it does raise some concerns that we might have unforeseeable consequences. I guess the other thing I really want to stress is that from a timing standpoint, we also work closely with the Spatial Analysis Lab, and its presence at the University of Montana is extremely important, and part of the reason that we have funding specifically allocated for our projects with the lab. And that's something that it was addressed a little bit in the report, but not in the depth that our questions weren't answered to the degree that we would need to have them answered to feel confident about the future of the program. And I think some of it is just a timing issue that we didn't get the written report until Monday. So and today's Wednesday. So that really hasn't given us time to interact with the library and the university to really dig deep into answering all of our questions and getting the assurance that this solution might not create some problems that are not intended, but could be very serious for our moving forward. And with that, I guess I would also say that to follow up with Ken's comments, as I read it, the report was really presenting one alternative. And from what I hear from the university and from speaking with other partners, it doesn't seem like a breadth of other alternatives has been investigated thoroughly. And maybe that's been done as background material. We don't know. But I think it would be really helpful to step back and say, what is the key problem that's trying to be addressed here, and are there some other alternatives for coming up with that solution? And it sounds like from what Scott has said that perhaps some other alternatives were brought forward and just haven't been presented to all of the partners. And I know that some of the commissioners have different degrees of understanding about the partners' interest in the program and support for the program. And it might seem a little disturbing to see these charts and say, is the program really focusing on its core because it has so many partners with so many diverse interests? And I can tell you with all the assurance in my soul that that program is dedicated to its core mission. And regardless of where the money comes from, that core mission stays key in its functions. And that's why we continue to support it. And the diversity of the partners leads to its strength and is such a critical part of it. And that would be another concern for our agency and others, I assume, is that it isn't just our ability to partner with the program. It's that by partnering with the program and the breadth of other partners, we have the opportunity to interact with those folks in ways that help us all focus on the key information and the source and use of that information. And while certainly the library is dedicated to promoting partnerships also, it would be in a different environment. And there's no doubt that that would change. And so, I think it's important to be thinking about some of those issues and perhaps just step back and say, this has come forward kind of a late date in relationship to the timing of your meeting, and to give those partners, like my agency and some of the other folks, a little more time to really dig in and say, how is this, are there other options, and how might this play out in terms of the impact on us? I appreciate your time.
Can I ask, when I'm unclear, I don't know the answer. When have you been involved in conversations? Because I know the study has been going on for 4 months and it's been publicly noted, but I don't know when your agency has been called in to be part of the conversations and when input has been sought from your agency or from you.
I probably became aware of it about a month ago,
Okay.
I would say. It was prior to the partners meeting.
Okay.
And then I started asking questions about what exactly is this about, but without any written, and I didn't have any written material to provide to the leadership in my organization. So even though our state resource conservation attended the partners meeting with me, we didn't have the report at that time, and Jenny gave an overview presentation there, and there was some discussion from the partners, but the details we didn't have in front of us to really ask. A lot of it was the inability to have information to ask the right questions. And so a lot of the discussion, and certainly a lot of all that we could respond to at that time was very generic. And so probably within the last month, and I've had a few conversations with Jenny and with Bryce, but it's hampered my ability to communicate in writing with the leadership of my organization, and certainly with the financial services parts of our organization, which and I think it's true not just of the NRCS, but most federal agencies have gone from a model where a lot of their financial services were handled at the state level, are now handled at regional and national levels. So it isn't just a matter of me picking up the phone or taking a drive to Bozeman and talking to a contracting officer there. It means it's a much more involved process. And a lot of the what I tried to present in here in terms of the financial end of it is for federal agencies to provide funding either in contracts or cooperative agreements with other entities, we also have to provide pretty elaborate justification of what is it we're going to do and why can't we get those services elsewhere? Basically, why can't we go to the private sector? And so as part of that justification, having the Heritage Program affiliated with the university is extremely important because there are certain types of funding and certain funding vehicles that are specifically tied to affiliation with institutions of higher learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's unique to my agency, and it probably isn't unique to other partners. So that would be another thing that would take definitely more in-depth investigation to say, okay, if next year my funds could come from this pot of money, but if Heritage isn't under the university, I can't use that money, and I don't have any other funding, what does that mean? And what would that mean to the overall Heritage Program budget if, a certain percentage of agencies and partners no longer could provide funding?
Thank you. I think there may be other questions for you. I appreciate your comments.
I have a friendly correction. Privacy and data integrity are core values in libraries. The state library is a library. We lead with that. I don't want to say that we're better or worse than the university system or a university, generic university, but that's a core value of libraries. And so, just to be clear, quick question: how long would it take for your agency to work through the contract details to change from the university managing the contract to the state library managing contract? How many months?
Well, at this point, we're going into the holiday season, so I'm not would.
Give me a guess. 3 months? 2 months? 1 month? 10 months?
Probably in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 months.
Okay, a quarter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Maynard? I think there were.
Just to follow up, I think that's one thing I think we got the state part. I'm more comfortable with that than the federal questions on this. And I think it would be useful to try to get more feedback. The partners, I can't remember the BLM people at the partners meeting. I don't remember their position, but I talked to the Forest Service. And they were from the GIS cartography staff, not contracting. And it would be good to assess. That's where I see the biggest potential things that might pop out of this in a couple of months is from the federal contracting and threatening some of those issues. So I do think the staff we need to seriously consider talking more to the contracting folks in addition to the GIS people and others in the agencies. One other thing too that I just said, because I'm a private sector person. I've worked with natural resources for most of my career. Everything I've seen from every partners meeting and from the Heritage Program at Bryce is the work they do, even in other states, is core to the mission. And I'm very comfortable with the fact that all the work is done. I'm less concerned about us, state library, going out with soft money contracts and doing work in wetlands in California and Nevada. I think back to Bill Gates or whoever said that, you got to do something 10,000 times before you really get to be good at it. And I think we're learning in all those other, places. Admittedly, it'd be nice if it's in Montana, and we have limited resources. But I do think that that the soft money, and I mean, I lived on soft money my whole career at the university, and it provides a buffer. And again, going back to the rawness of the budget cuts, to me, I realize there's issues and staff are stressed by going after them. I mean, I live on soft money essentially as a company. And I know the stress that puts on everybody and staff, but it also provides diversity and resiliency. So it's got its values in that.
Mm-hmm. Ken, what did you think about the evaluation that Jenny and Bryce did with the green, red, yellow, showing poor performance in regards to what core funding is supposed to be performing?
Yeah, I'd like.
Was that not a concern?
No, I would like to talk about that more because in looking at I was trying to find the part on that, but the part on, I mean, a lot of that seems to be what we do really well here. That's why I'm talking maybe part of the discussion. I'd like more details on the part versus the whole coming over, and I'm trying to find that in a minute. But it basically the part about species status seemed to be the only core function that's listed in that bottom part. That and then assistance to the public. I mean, there was discussion, and I thought it was a little naive in the report where we talked about, well, when the summer when they're out in the field, the staff can answer questions at the library better. So I don't know how much. I mean, I get a sense that the biologists and the ecologists and the others are answering things that other folks in the library can't necessarily answer. So there's definitely parts of core services that are in between, that are in the gray area. But I felt that quite a bit of that, the web services, the programming for doing the environmental assessment reports, things like that, are all could be very well handled by the library versus the more research function and those type of things.
So I got this report on Monday and read through it. Got home last night after a long day outside and got the emails, and I want to thank everyone, if you're here, that you sent those emails and participated. You didn't just sit back and go, this is going to be a done deal. The commission's going to just rubber stamp it, and we don't have a chance to have any further discussion. So thank you for taking part and being proactive. So then I got up this morning and I reread the report and I reread all of the emails. And it seems to me that in spite of the fact that we want to move forward, I think that we need to give everyone more of an opportunity to participate and express their views. So I would encourage the commission to postpone the vote on this until our next meeting so that, I mean, if you're mad at us and some of those emails were a little testy, that's not going to be a good partnership. That's not going to be a good reaction. And I think that we need to strive to make this the best possible yes or the best possible no.
Well, I agree with my colleague, Ms. Doggett.
Wow, that's a first.
Not a first. And actually, I would offer a motion.
Well, can we be sure that we're finished with public comment?
I think we should continue
I
talking.
have more comments.
Oh,
We
I
can
was
have more
just
comment.
being practical.
You're just hungry for lunch.
Yes.
I didn't hear the public comment close yet, so.
No, it didn't.
It didn't. I was just anxious to.
We shot him down.
Yeah.
I was hoping
He
for
lost
discussion
that.
following the motion, but this is great.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Viv Hamill, Chief Legal Counsel for the Montana University System. The Commissioner just learned about this topic, obviously breakdown in communication on our side. Late Monday, I was on a plane. We got to talk yesterday about it, just barely getting up to speed on it. He would like to request that you slow it down. He has great concerns about an overhaul of the whole relationship in terms of how it works.
We think we can fix some things, or try to, in the intervening time, and we'd like to try and do that, and continue to be good partners. The Commissioner of Higher Ed is the operational director and supervisor of the campuses. So we would have liked to have been involved in this from the beginning. Again, obviously a breakdown in communication on our part because whoever the fiscal person who you were talking to in our office, it wasn't raised. So I'll have to get to the bottom of that. But I also, in looking at the statute, do see in 9015-2017 that the Montana Heritage Information Advisory Council is charged specifically in Section 7 with advising on the operation of the Montana Heritage Program. So I do think legally that's a hiccup there, and this item needs to come before that advisory council before it goes before the commission. But I'm here today also to request special notice of any meeting agenda where this topic is going to come up. The Commissioner's office is at 560 North Park in Helena. We really want to get up to speed, maybe have some meetings with Jenny in our office or here or wherever you want with all the stakeholders present, so we can really have a robust discussion. And there's a lot of details and fine points to your concerns and legitimate concerns. We'd like to work them out before we have to go to the drastic step of maybe you taking this on internally, which is something the Commissioner's initial discussions with Scott yesterday and with me, he's very concerned about doing that. And again, I think we need more time on such a major drastic proposal. Thank you. Any questions?
Can we just have some clarity on your point about the advisory council? Is there a separate council, or is that the partners group that met on November 25th?
Well, I'm wondering if Ms. Hamill is referring to the Natural Resource Information System Advisory Council.
No, it's the one in 97, 2057.
I believe it's
15.
The statute is the Natural Resource Data Advisory Council.
Yeah.
The
9015.
Office of the Commissioner of Higher Ed's representation on that council is John Edge from the Montana Bureau of Mines. He was at the partners.
They were at the partners meeting.
But there wasn't a public noticed advisory council meeting to take up this topic.
Not the advisory council, no, it was noticed through the Heritage Partners meeting, of which the advisory council were invited to attend. But they did not take action, if that's your point.
Well, I don't think it's going to be a legal hiccup if this gets slowed down and we all work together to try and figure out a path forward that works for everybody, including the Commissioner's office and the university and you all.
What's your sense for how long it will take to work things out?
Well, again,
my same question as I had to Catherine.
Again, with the holidays coming right up on us, and I can tell you the Commissioner's work schedule is booked 7 days a week.
Yeah,
very busy. That we probably get a meeting together by early January, and get into the weeds of all of this. It would take several months at least.
Any questions for?
Not a question, so but a question on the NRIS Advisory Council. So let's finish any questions first.
Okay.
No further questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I was incredibly impressed with the MLIA Council. It's probably the best discussion in the 25 years I've been involved with them. At the last meeting, sat in on that. I think it'd be really, as far how's it the NRIS Council met or formed, or what's the status of it?
They are formed. They don't meet regularly. They meet on an ad hoc basis.
Oh, okay, so they don't meet like MLIA regular. I think it'd be really useful to get their. I haven't been to any of their meetings for years, but it'd be useful, given the success of the MLIA Council and the value of that broad spectrum of private, federal, state, local government input, including a lot of partners that don't always directly play with us. So that would be useful input, I would hope. But again, without knowing I need to look more into the people in there on it and such. But in general, that kind of broad partner, beyond the partners themselves, because the partners that come to Heritage are really integral to Heritage. But in the translating that to the Montana Land Information Act Council, partners there that are, directly part of it provide a lot of input and value as well from sort of an outside, not as closely inside perspective. So if we are going to end up extending this a little bit, it would be good to, I think, have them called and get their input on it as well, or to bounce things off of.
And just to reemphasize, I'm trying to think, 3-4 of it's a very small council. We're at the partners.
We're at the meeting, okay, so yes. That makes me feel better.
If I could.
Please.
Thank you. I don't know if there's going to be any more public comment or anything, but listening to all of this and listening to you as well, there's information that we probably need, that we do need. I'll just say not probably. But I wouldn't want it to be open-ended. I think it's up to the commission here to determine, not possibly even in a priority, of the information that we need, rather than having our partners come together and coalesce over something that we bring up again. So I think we need to be clearly defined in going forward. If we do postpone. So it needs to be a strategic postponement, given a date, and making sure that we have given the authority for a discussion.
I appreciate that.
I want to echo.
The superintendent of public coach.
Thanks, Elsie. I want to echo, I guess, something that Aaron said and what you just said. Thank you, and what Bruce has said. My concern, today was the appropriate day to take action on that, and I'm going to recommend against my better judgment that we don't do that. My concern as the commission chair is that we're engaging in an 11th hour delay of a study that has been going on for 4 months. And I don't know why OCHI found out about this last week. That is a breakdown, because there were people who were assigned to contact OCHI, and I don't know why that didn't happen. It is a legitimate concern. Whatever happened, I think we should just move on from it, and OCHI can figure out that problem. This has been going on for 4 months. Melissa has been working with OCHI. Scott I understood that he had been in conversations for months with OCHI, but maybe not, or maybe not the right people. But they should have been aware of this study for months. They haven't been, so let's give them the opportunity to do that, is my thinking. This is not just Jenny's recommendation. Bryce worked a great deal on this recommendation. You didn't work on this recommendation.
I provided feedback to Jenny and Evan, but I
okay. All righty. But that was the charge. So there, to Aaron's point, it concerns me that the viability, the program concerns me that there's this lack of communication, that 4 months later we're still not, nobody's on the same page. People haven't been communicated with. And to Bruce's point, we have a responsibility as a commission. And I think part of sort of what I'm hearing is everybody has a different responsibility. Everybody has a different job. Everybody has a different responsibility. We all want to make sure that we're fulfilling our responsibilities and that we're all doing it cohesively. The commission's responsibility is to look at the core funding and whether or not the core funding is achieving what it's supposed to be achieving. And we have the chart provided by Jenny, which I was under the impression that Bruce also worked on. The evaluations of the committee, I'm assuming you work on those. The red, yellow, maybe you don't. Green, I thought you did.
The scope of work report, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I produced it.
Okay, so we all have evidence that the core funding isn't meeting the goals that it's set to meet. And that isn't everybody's responsibility to worry about that, but that is our responsibility to worry about that. So out of respect for the MSL staff and those of you who are local and those of you who are contracted through the university, I would like to Elsie's point, to propose that we table this for 2 months and meet back at the next meeting. I think that's.
May I offer
that's,
an alternative?
You can, if I could just finish, but and then you can disagree with anything that I said. So I would like to direct the state librarian in consultation with Bryce, the program manager, to come back to the commission with a plan that shows what the commission can do to make sure that we're meeting the statutory requirements with the core funding, not the soft funding, but with the core funding, because this is an MSL program. We are the commissioners who are in charge of making sure that this program is successful in regard at least to the core funding. So that's my recommendation on how we end up proceeding. If we let it go, we already let it go for 4 months. The study has been conducted for 4 months, which was sufficient time for a study. There were some holes. I think we should fill them, and I think we should come back in 2 months with those holes filled so that we can make a more informed decision. And Bruce, please feel free to.
Well, I agree with the substance
Agree
of
or
what you suggested. I was actually going to offer a motion that was maybe gave staff and partners and a little bit more flexibility. My motion would, if we're done with public comment, I stand corrected.
No, we're not. We're still.
Are you ready for
I'm just saying. I'm just saying what my motion would be. I haven't made. I don't make motions.
Well, I didn't think you did.
No, I don't. But if I were to make a motion, I would make a motion that we revisit it in 2 months. What motion would you possibly? And we'll still do public comment.
Well,
Maybe don't put it in terms of what motion it would be, but what your thoughts are about how to progress.
My thoughts would be to present the commission with a motion that would, had I really been making a motion, basically instructed staff to pursue and resolve these issues that appear to be stumbling blocks with our partners, with the university system, with others. As per my question to Catherine and to, I'm sorry, the legal counsel for the U system.
Viv.
Ms. Hamill.
Ms. Hamill, thank you. Old age, short-term memory. And basically, not table the motion for a specific period of time, but for as long as is necessary, hoping that in fact that we would be able to call a special meeting with these issues resolved sometime either this month or in January.
How would you address the timeline that Jenny and I believe Bryce wrote the time? I believe you collaborated on the timeline. No, Bryce didn't collaborate on the timeline. Jenny just wrote the timeline by herself. So she wrote is it 18-month timeline?
So what this does is basically kind of stomps all over the beginning of the timeline, and I regret that.
Okay.
But it seems to me, as per a number of comments, my learned colleague Ms. Doggett, that we should make the state library has always worked collaboratively in a friendly fashion. We should take and extend ourselves, regardless of the parts that irritate me and perhaps others about the way this has proceeded. We should make our best ability, or do our best that we have in our abilities to take and resolve as many of these issues as we can, both legal and contractual and otherwise, statutory and otherwise, and then bring that back as quickly as possible to the commission, not necessarily the February meeting, so that the timeline can get re-begun. So if I were to make a motion, that's what I would move, hopefully more concisely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that would be really long.
It's like half a dictionary.
Yeah. So I would invite. I see more people who would like to do some. Do some public comment.
If there's any partners on the phone or in the room, if they'd be given a chance to.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're still doing public comment.
The last I looked, there wasn't any on the phone, so.
I'd like to ask a question.
If not, I'd appreciate the opportunity to say a few words.
Sure. Please.
So I guess the way I would characterize all of this is that, and the way I view it is that we are very much at the start of the discussion. 4 months has been not enough time for staff and partners to wrap their heads around it. And as many have said, the Monday release of that document, I actually haven't read. I've read the earlier version, but I haven't read the final version.
yet because I was traveling to Coeur d'Alene yesterday and back. So I just would characterize that we really are at the start of the discussion instead of near an end point. And I want to offer just 4 principles for moving forward to the commission. And that is, first, do no harm. And that's been right at the forefront of my feedback to Evan and Jenny throughout the whole process. And I think a vote today would do harm. Second, that an outcome of this needs to show clear, tangible benefits. That was clear in my read of the partners meeting. The feedback that was provided there is that things are working. We want to see clear, tangible benefits in any kind of administrative change. Third is that we need to honor our staff and honor our partners, and that we need to honor that dedication and commitment that they've shown to the program over the years. I'd be concerned about taking action today and not hearing from them to a much greater extent. And then the final principle is power of partnership. So I preach this. Our model that we have, our partnership that we have, our partnership committee that we have, we're kind of exporting that as a model to other heritage programs across the country. And I really believe that wholeheartedly. And I would be afraid that a vote today or potentially even in 2 months, depending on how things go. I've got some ideas on that front, but we want to honor that partnership. There was discussion over threats. Any kind of change is going to come across on either side as like, wow, this is really threatening to me. What do I do in response? Threaten back. And that opportunity to truly listen, to what the underlying issues are, what individual staff need to do in order to do their jobs. I think that can only come with time. So I would hesitate to put a 2-month, and I just don't think you want to put a timeline on this. I think if you get, you certainly could, but you don't want to put let's just say it this way. If our partners all see a clear, tangible benefit of moving their agreements to the university or to the library, then I think the university would then say, all right, because they're hearing from the partners. So the story that I want to offer in terms of the power of the partnership is after the budget cuts hit, right? And Ken, let's make no mistake about it, this is a much, much bigger decision than the budget cuts, because the funding that is provided through the core funding is about, roughly 1/3 of the funding that the overall program that makes the overall program whole. So this would be a much bigger decision, and why it's so important to involve the partners. So after the budget cuts hit in 2017, we had lost $230,000. I immediately called a partners meeting, the key partners, the funders that have provided supplemental core funding, and within 10 days, they came up with $280,000. So they more than made up for what we lost from the funding cuts. So literally I was sitting there adding it up, crying, because I couldn't believe that they had so much trust in us. So again, I think we want to make sure that the partners are involved, moving forward in detail. What I would offer on that front is, I think, having a meeting just like after the budget cuts hit of those key funding partners coming to the table, the ones that are providing the big chunk of our projects and also the supplemental core. We just need a meeting of the minds with that group, and I think an informed decision can come out of that. So those are my thoughts. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I do. I have a question, and thank you for your thoughts. So I understand that you're not speaking in reaction to the actual recommendation that you worked on with Jenny, because you haven't read it. That was kind of how you began. You read the draft, but then you didn't read the final draft because you were traveling, is what you said? So I understand
this isn't
that.
my recommendation. I mean, I just gave you my recommendation. I think it would be bad to say that I'm recommending this. That's not.
What can you
Jenny
describe your role then? Because I guess I'm misunderstanding your role in working on the recommendation. You contributed data.
So throughout the process, I've just been giving feedback to Jenny and Evan on this, you know, some of my tenets along those lines are things are generally working. We need to see, staff need to see clear, tangible benefits. If we do it, I think it's a good philosophical debate as to whether we do something along these lines. It could be some of the staff. I think the discussion is entirely appropriate. It's not clear to me. It's not clear to me what is right. If that's.
Okay. So thank you. And then my second question for you is your first tenant. It was that you listed, or value that you listed, which I completely agree with, is to first do no harm. So from the point of view of a commissioner, to look and see the trend line of the buying power of the core funding, and then to also see the evaluations of what's being achieved with the core funding, which I do think you're part of. Do you agree that we are doing harm if we look at that and do nothing?
If we keep going in this same trend, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Something needs to be done. I don't think everything under the current model with the contract to the university, I'm fully convinced that everything that could be done hasn't been done. I think more could be done on that front. Specifically, the lobbying power, that could be applied if all of our partners applied that. And I think that would be a good harnessing tool to help out other library program areas as well, because I'm sure that they would speak on behalf of the library as a whole.
Yeah.
So
thank you. We have vastly different roles, and so it's really good, I think, to be able to talk and find where the common ground is and what the shared goals and values are, so that we can move. And to Elsie's point, not to yours or to Bruce's, but so that we can move within a prescribed time frame. Thank you.
I have a really dumb question. I don't know the answer to it. Who do you report to?
Everyone, all of our partners, and that's hopefully completely inherent in our.
Who's your supervisor?
My direct report would be Scott Whitmer.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Huh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, just comment off of the comments. I definitely think, so far just listening to everybody, I feel like, I guess one clarification, the core data is managed by the state, correct? Through the library. Because, so the data that is collected, and then because the library has a statute.
I want to make sure I understand.
Yes.
So yes, the data is the data of the library.
Okay.
We work through the Heritage Program. Their science staff collect the data. They're the ones responsible for doing the species rankings, the status updates, that kind of thing. But the data belongs to the library. That's clear in statute as well as in contract.
Okay, because that just was one of the concerns, was that about data integrity being through the university. Maybe not everyone realizes that it ends up here.
Mm-hmm.
So that I just wanted to get corrected on that. I definitely think one of my very first points was it'd be nice to understand a little more what the previous 4-month timeline, maybe break down a little more. Have all stakeholders been on all levels. and I feel like what we're hearing is no. And then I'm really brought back to some of, I think, the best work the library has done in the last, 6 years since I've been a commissioner is doing the strategic framework and really going after organizational change within the library. I guess I just want to remind everybody that that took a lot of time. It took us time to get to all our stakeholders about the strategic framework, but we did have actionable goals. So I don't think we should say let's table this with no actionable goals. And then I also wanted to just remind everybody what our strategic framework is, which is to foster partnerships, which I feel like is what we're doing right now by listening and, by already having these partnerships to secure sufficient and sustainable funding, which I think is part of what is driving this conversation, and then to create a useful information infrastructure. So those are the three things we really want to focus on. And I think for our partners, for them to understand I feel like how well we've been doing. I've never seen an organization who has been so clear-minded in making sure everyone has input. So, giving everyone time to come up and tell us what your input is so important to us. And then just being able to make sure that the data, the information, it's being presented to the public, to the partners, the people who need to know or want to know, in a way that is usable for everybody. And I do think the Montana State Library does more than an excellent job of, of meeting these strategic framework goals. So I think for myself, just calming myself down and thinking about what we do here at the State Library is this conversation definitely needs to happen in order for us to keep improving. I'm just looking at them right here. So thank you for being here, because that is one of the big things that we do well. And, please keep an open mind about potential changes in the future. I think the State Library is one of the biggest change agents in the state. And we have done some amazing things, at least in the last 6 years since I've been here. So,
Thank you, Erin. We have been at it for about 3 hours, and I feel that I'm remiss if I don't call a restroom break. So if we could all take a break and then come back, and some people showed up and I think that people still want to talk, and I would absolutely love to hear everybody talk. So in the interest of not repeating ourselves, we can all also kind of collect our thoughts during a break so that we can be succinct, but also get everything said that needs to be said, and the commissioners can also think about what their ideas about future actions are. So it's 12:10. Let's meet back at 12:20.